Admiral Catherine Cole stood at the center of the command deck and watched the holographic display with tired eyes. She had not slept in 2 days. None of them had. The crew of the Terran flagship Resolute moved around her in tense silence, and every face showed the same fear that she was trying to hide. Lieutenant Danny Marsh turned from his console and spoke in a voice that was almost a whisper. He said that the anomaly had appeared again, and that it was now entering the Kepler system. Catherine walked closer to the display and looked at the single blip that had caused so much chaos across the galaxy. For 3 weeks, this unknown vessel had been moving through the territory of the Valorian Empire like a shadow. It had no identification codes. It matched no known ship design. It did not respond to any communication in any language that anyone had ever tried. Catherine asked Marsh to show her the path the ship had taken. The hologram changed, and a dotted line appeared that traced the journey of the mysterious vessel through 6 different star systems. It had passed through the most heavily defended regions of Valorian space. It had glided past military bases and fortified worlds without ever being stopped. Every time the Imperial warships tried to intercept it, the vessel simply disappeared and then reappeared, somewhere else that was light years away. Commander Nathan Perry walked up to Catherine with a datapad in his hands. His face was grim as he told her that the Valorian High Command was demanding answers. The Emperor himself was threatening to hold the Terran Alliance responsible if this turned out to be some kind of human weapon. Catherine let out a short laugh that held no humor. She told Perry that if humanity had technology like this, they would not still be fighting over mining rights on border worlds. The relationship between the Terran Alliance and the Valorian Empire had always been difficult. The Valorians were an ancient species with a vast fleet and a rigid military structure. They had always looked down on humanity as a young and unimportant race that was barely worth noticing. Humans had survived not through strength, but through cleverness and in stubborn refusal to give up even when the odds were against them. Marsh called out again, and this time his voice was louder and filled with alarm. He said that the anomaly was moving and that it was heading directly toward Valoria Prime, which was the homeworld of the entire Empire. Catherine felt a cold sensation spread through her chest. If that ship reached the Valorian homeworld, then everything would fall apart. The Empire would blame humanity for whatever happened, and the fragile peace that had lasted for 40 years would end in fire. She turned to Perry and gave her orders. She told him to get her a direct communication line to Admiral Carter at Terran Command. She also told him to prepare the Resolute for immediate departure because they were going to intercept that ship themselves. Perry looked at her with wide eyes and told her that entering Valorian space without permission would be an act of war. Catherine faced him, and her expression was hard as stone. She said that if they did not figure out what that thing was before the Valorians did, there would be a war anyway. At least this way they might have a chance to prevent it. The engines of the Resolute began to hum as power flowed through the great ship. Catherine returned to watching the display while her crew prepared for what might be the most important mission of their lives. She thought about her career and all the battles she had fought and all the decisions she had made. None of them felt as heavy as this one. Perry came back to report that the ship was ready. He also told her that Admiral Carter had responded and was not happy about her plan but understood the necessity. Terran Command would provide cover if the Valorians demanded an explanation. Catherine nodded and gave the order to engage the faster-than-light drive. The stars on the view screen stretched into long lines of light, and the Resolute jumped into the void between systems. During the journey, Catherine gathered her senior officers in the briefing room. Around the table sat Perry and Marsh, along with Chief Engineer Samuel Drake and Science Officer Linda Torres. They were the people she trusted most, and she needed their thoughts on what they might be facing. Torres spoke first and said that she had analyzed every piece of data they had on the unknown vessel. She said that it made no sense. The ship seemed to have no engine signature and no power source that their instruments could detect. According to every scan they had run, the vessel should not be able to move at all, and yet it traveled faster than anything they had ever seen. Drake added that he had looked at the visual recordings from the Valorian attempts to intercept it. He said that the ship did not accelerate or decelerate. It simply appeared in one place and then appeared in another. Whatever technology it used was completely beyond their understanding. Perry asked the question that was on everyone's mind. He asked if they thought it was a threat. Catherine considered the question carefully before answering. She said that in 3 weeks of traveling through Valorian space, the ship had not fired a single weapon. It had not approached any populated worlds. It had not done anything except move from place to place. That did not mean it was safe, but it also did not mean it was hostile. The only way to know for certain was to make contact. Marsh asked how they were supposed to make contact with something that did not respond to any form of communication. Catherine admitted that she did not know. She said they would figure it out when they got there. The meeting ended, and the officers returned to their stations. Catherine stayed behind for a moment and looked out the small window at the swirling colors of faster-than-light travel. She thought about humanity and how far they had come from their small blue planet. They had reached the stars and built colonies on distant worlds and learned that they were not alone in the universe. But in all that time, they had never encountered anything like this. The ghost ship represented something new and unknown, and that was both terrifying and exciting. She whispered to herself that whatever was out there, she hoped it came in peace. Then she straightened her uniform and walked back to the bridge to face whatever was waiting for them. The Resolute continued its journey through the darkness between stars, and every passing moment brought them closer to an encounter that would change everything. The Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Valorian home system and immediately found itself surrounded by warships. Catherine counted more than 30 vessels arranged in a formation that left no doubt about their intentions. Each ship had its weapons pointed directly at the Resolute. Perry reported that they were being targeted by every ship in the fleet. Catherine told him to hold their position and to open a communication channel to the Valorian flagship. The main view screen flickered and then showed the face of High Commander Vexor Thorn. He was one of the most feared officers in the bus. Valorian military, and his reputation for ruthlessness was known across the galaxy. His skin was pale lavender and stretched tight over sharp, angular bones. He had 4 eyes arranged in 2 pairs, and all of them were fixed on Catherine with obvious hatred. Thorn spoke through the translation system, and his voice was cold. He said that Admiral Cole had violated Imperial sovereignty and demanded that she explain herself immediately or face destruction. Catherine stepped forward and kept her posture calm, even though her heart was racing. She told Thorn that they both knew why she was there. The unknown vessel was heading toward his homeworld, and neither of them knew what it wanted. She proposed a joint operation to intercept and identify the ship before something terrible happened. Thorn made a sound of disgust. He asked if she expected him to believe that this was not some kind of human trick. He said that her species had always been known for deception. Catherine replied without hesitation. She said that if humanity wanted to attack Valoria Prime, they would not need tricks. They would simply attack. This ship was not theirs, and if it posed a threat, then it threatened both their peoples equally. Thorn was silent for a long moment. His upper eyes narrowed, while his lower pair remained fixed on the screen. Catherine could see that he was thinking and calculating the risks. Finally, he gave a small nod. He told her that she could proceed alongside his fleet, but warned her that if she betrayed them, he would personally make sure that Earth burned. The communication ended and the screen went dark. Perry muttered that Thorn seemed like a pleasant person. Catherine told him that Thorn was scared, and that scare people were dangerous. She said they needed to make sure they did not give him any reason to start shooting. The combined fleet moved deeper into the system, with the human ship traveling among the Valorian warships. Catherine watched the sensor displays as they searched for the ghost ship. Hours passed and the tension on the bridge grew heavier with each minute. Then, Marsh announced that he had found it. The unknown vessel was hovering motionless above one of the moons that orbited Valoria Prime. Catherine ordered the fleet to slow down and approach carefully. As they drew closer, the ghost ship became visible on the view screen, and she heard gasps from her crew. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in her entire career. The hull of the vessel was black, but it was a darkness that seemed impossible. It did not reflect light at all, but instead seemed to absorb it completely. The ship was roughly the size of a heavy cruiser, but its shape was strange and unsettling. It had flowing curves and angles that seemed wrong somehow. Looking at it for too long made her eyes hurt. She ordered Torres to scan the vessel. Torres worked at a console for several minutes and then turned back with a confused expression. She reported that she was getting nothing at all. There were no energy readings and no life signs and no radiation signatures. According to their sensors, the ship did not exist. Perry said what everyone was thinking. He said that it was right there in front of them, and yet their instruments said it was not real. Catherine made her decision quickly. She announced that she was going to board the vessel herself. Perry immediately protested and said that it was too dangerous. They had no idea what was waiting on that ship. Catherine told him that was exactly why she needed to find out. She gave him orders to follow if something happened to her. If she did not return, he was to take the Resolute and leave immediately. He was to report everything they had learned to Terran Command. Whatever this ship was, humanity needed to know about it. She left the bridge and made her way to the shuttle bay, where a small craft was waiting for her. A young pilot named Kevin Brooks was already inside and preparing for launch. He told her that he would get her there safely. The shuttle detached from the Resolute and began its slow approach toward the ghost ship. Through the small windows, Catherine watched as the black vessel grew larger. It was completely silent and completely still. There were no lights and no movement, and no sign that anything inside was aware of their approach. As they drew close, something changed. A section of the black hull simply folded open like paper being bent. There was no mechanism visible and no sound. One moment the hull was solid, and the next moment there was an opening that had not existed before. Brooks brought the shuttle inside and set it down on a surface that was smooth and featureless. Catherine told him to wait there and to leave immediately if she did not return within 1 hour. She opened the shuttle door and stepped out onto the deck of the unknown vessel. The interior was vast and empty. Blue light seemed to come from everywhere at once, but there was no visible source. The walls curved away into distances that her mind could not quite understand. She felt small and insignificant, like an ant walking through a cathedral built for giants. She walked forward slowly with her hand resting on her weapon. Her footsteps made no sound on the smooth floor. The silence was absolute and oppressive. Then a voice spoke, and it came from all around her at once. The voice said her name. It said Admiral Catherine Cole. It said that she was the first being in 3,000 cycles to board this vessel willingly. Catherine stopped walking and looked around for the source of the voice, but saw nothing. She asked who was speaking and what they wanted. The voice replied that all would be explained and that she should not be afraid. It said that she had been expected. Catherine did not know what that meant, but she knew that there was no turning back now. She had come seeking answers, and she was about to receive them, whether she was ready or not. Catherine stood in the center of the vast empty chamber and waited for the voice to speak again. The blue light that surrounded her seemed to pulse gently like a heartbeat. She kept her hand on her weapon, but she knew deep inside that it would be useless against whatever she was facing. The voice spoke again and told her to be calm. It said that there was no danger here. It said that this vessel was not a weapon, and it had not come to harm anyone. Catherine asked once more who was speaking. She asked what this ship was and why it had been traveling through Valorian space. The space around her began to change. The smooth walls seemed to dissolve, and suddenly she was no longer standing inside a ship. She was standing on a vast plain beneath an alien sky. Stars filled the heavens above her in patterns she did not recognize. In the distance, she could see great cities rising toward the clouds. Their towers were beautiful and strange, and they caught the light of suns that seemed both near and impossibly far away. The voice told her that she was seeing a memory. It said that this was how their world had looked long ago, before time had taken everything away. Catherine asked who they were. The voice answered that they were called the Architects. It explained that long ago they had traveled the galaxy and seeded countless worlds with the potential for life. They had created the pathways between stars that made faster than light travel possible. They had watched as species after species rose from primitive beginnings to reach for the heavens. Catherine felt her mind struggling to understand what she was being told. She asked what had happened to them. The voice said that their time had ended. It said that every species, no matter how advanced, eventually reaches the end of its journey. The Architects had passed beyond this universe into something else. But before they left, they had created guardians like this vessel. These ships were meant to watch over the galaxy and wait. Catherine asked what they were waiting for. The landscape around her changed again. Now she saw images moving past her like a river of light. She saw the Valorian Empire in its earliest days, when it was just a few struggling colonies fighting to survive. She saw another species that looked like giant insects. They had dominated an entire section of the galaxy before destroying themselves in civil war. She saw dozens of other civilizations rise and fall. Some lasted for thousands of years, and others burned out quickly. But they all followed the same pattern. The voice explained that every species they had observed eventually fell into the same cycle. They would rise and expand, and then encounter other species. And then they would either destroy others or be destroyed themselves. Competition and conflict and extinction. The pattern repeated endlessly across millions of years. Then the images changed, and Catherine saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. She saw Earth, her home. A small blue world spinning in the darkness. She saw primitive humans looking up at the night sky with wonder in their eyes. She saw the first fires being built and the first tools being made. She saw humanity reaching upward toward the stars. The voice said that humanity was different. Catherine asked what made them different. The voice showed her more images of human history. She saw the wars and the violence and the cruelty that her species had inflicted on itself. She saw the darkest moments of human existence. But she also saw something else. She saw people helping each other after disasters. She saw scientists working together to cure diseases. She saw ordinary people performing acts of kindness and sacrifice. She saw the best and the worst of humanity laid bare before her. The voice said that humans carried within them the capacity for both great darkness and great light. It said that unlike other species, humanity had not allowed either side to win completely. Humans fought among themselves, but they also reached out to others. They destroyed, but they also created. They fell down, but they always got back up again. Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes, though she did not fully understand why. The voice continued and said that for 3,000 cycles, the Guardian vessels had watched and waited. They had observed every species that achieved interstellar travel. They had tested each one in their own way, and every single one had failed, until now. Catherine asked what test humanity had passed. The voice explained that when the Guardian vessel appeared in Valorian space, it had deliberately provoked a response. It wanted to see how the various species would react to something unknown and potentially threatening. The Valorian response had been predictable. They had tried to destroy what they did not understand. Their fear had turned immediately to aggression. But humanity had responded differently. When faced with the unknown, Catherine had chosen to approach rather than attack. She had sought cooperation with her rivals instead of conflict. She had boarded this vessel seeking understanding rather than conquest. The voice said that this was what they had been waiting for. This was why the test had been passed. Catherine thought about everything she was hearing. She thought about the decision she had made to come here alone. She had not done it because she was brave. She had done it because she was afraid of what would happen if no one did. She had done it because someone had to take the first step. She asked what happened now that the test was passed. The voice told her that the architects had left more than guardian vessels behind. They had left an inheritance. Knowledge and technology beyond anything the current species of the galaxy could imagine. This inheritance had been waiting for a species that was worthy of receiving it. The landscape dissolved, and Catherine found herself back inside the ship. Standing before her was a figure made entirely of light. It had a shape that was almost human, but not quite. It seemed to be looking at her with something that might have been hope. The figure told her that humanity had earned the right to claim what the architects had left behind. But it warned her that this gift came with responsibilities and dangers. The path ahead would not be easy. Catherine looked at the being of light and asked what she needed to do. The figure of light stood before Catherine and seemed to study her with eyes that were not eyes. She felt exposed under that gaze, as if every thought she had ever had was being read and understood. But she did not feel judged. She felt accepted. The figure spoke and told her that the architects had hidden 12 repositories across the galaxy. Each repository contained knowledge and technology that would seem like magic to the current species. These gifts had been preserved for millions of years, waiting for someone to claim them. The figure extended what might have been a hand. In the space above its palm, something began to form. It was a crystal about the size of her fist. It was clear and beautiful, and seemed to contain light within itself that shifted through every color she could name, and some she could not. The figure told her that this crystal contained the coordinates of all 12 repositories. It also contained instructions on how to access them and a basic guide to understanding what she would find inside. This was the key to the inheritance of the architects. Catherine reached out slowly and took the crystal. It was warm against her skin, and she could feel a faint vibration coming from within it. She asked what kind of technology these repositories contained. The figure began to explain. It said that the architects had developed methods of travel that did not tear holes in the fabric of space, like current faster than light drives did. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days instead of weeks. They had created energy systems that drew power from the very fabric of reality itself. A single generator could power an entire civilization forever without ever running out. Catherine listened with growing wonder as the figure continued. The architects had medical technology that could cure any disease and heal any wound. They could extend life far beyond its natural limits. They had machines that could terraform worlds in years instead of centuries. They had weapons that could destroy entire fleets with a single thought. The figure paused, and its light seemed to dim slightly. It said that this was where the warning became important. Catherine asked what the warning was. The figure told her that every gift could be used for good or for evil. The same technology that could heal could also harm. The same power that could build could also destroy. The architects had seen this happen many times. Species would discover advanced technology and use it to annihilate their enemies. Or they would use it carelessly and destroy themselves by accident. Catherine understood. She said that power without wisdom was dangerous. The figure agreed. It said that this was why they had waited so long to find the right species. Humanity had shown something that other species had not. They had shown the ability to make choices. Other species followed their instincts and their fears. Humans could override their instincts. They could choose to be better than their nature demanded. The figure continued with its warning. It said that humanity was not alone in the universe and that there were other forces that would notice when humans began accessing the repositories. Some of these forces had been dormant for millions of years. Others were younger, but no less dangerous. They would see humanity as either a threat to be eliminated or a tool to be used. Catherine asked what kind of forces it was talking about. The figure showed her visions. She saw things that lived in the darkness between galaxies. She saw ancient machines that had been drifting through space since before Earth existed. She saw species that had hidden themselves away waiting for the right moment to emerge. Some of them wanted power. Some wanted resources. Some wanted things that human minds could not comprehend. The figure said that by accepting this gift, Catherine was placing humanity at the center of a game that had been playing out for longer than her species could imagine. There would be dangers and challenges and enemies she could not yet foresee. Catherine looked at the crystal in her hand. She thought about everything she had learned. She thought about the responsibility she was being asked to accept on behalf of her entire species. It was terrifying. But she also thought about what the figure had said about humanity. They fell down, but they got back up. They made mistakes, but they learned from them. They had darkness in them, but they also had light. If any species could handle this responsibility, it was hers. She asked the figure why it had chosen to reveal itself now. Why, after 3,000 years of waiting, did it decide that this was the moment? The figure answered that the galaxy was approaching a turning point. Events were in motion that would determine the fate of countless worlds and species. Old powers were awakening. New threats were emerging. If humanity did not rise to meet these challenges, someone else would. And the figure said that it would prefer to see humans guiding the future rather than the alternatives. Catherine asked one more question. She asked why the Guardian ship had flown through Valorian space in such a provocative way. It must have known that its presence would cause panic and nearly start a war. The figure might have smiled, though it was hard to tell with a being made of light. It explained that this was part of the test. The architects needed to see how both species would respond to a genuine crisis. The Valorians had immediately tried to destroy what they did not understand. Their high commander had brought his entire fleet with weapons ready. But Catherine had come seeking answers. She had proposed cooperation instead of conflict. She had boarded this ship alone because she believed that understanding was more important than fear. The figure said that this difference mattered. It mattered very much. Catherine felt the weight of that statement settle on her shoulders. She had not thought she was doing anything special. She had just been doing what seemed right. The figure told her that this was exactly the point. Humans did not need to think about doing the right thing. For them, it was natural. It was instinct. This was what made them worthy of the inheritance. The light around them began to shift, and Catherine understood that her time here was coming to an end. She had so many more questions, but she sensed that the answers would have to wait. The figure told her to return to her people and share what she had learned. The choice of what to do next belonged to humanity as a whole. The figure said it hoped they would choose wisely. The world dissolved into brightness, and Catherine felt herself falling through light itself. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the shuttle. Kevin Brooks was staring at her with wide eyes. He asked if she was all right. He said she had been gone for almost 6 hours. Catherine looked down at her hand. The crystal was still there, glowing softly against her palm. It had not been a dream. She told Brooks to take them back to the Resolute. They had a lot of work to do. 3 weeks had passed since Catherine returned from the ghost ship, and now She stood in the grand chamber of the Terran Alliance on Earth. The room was filled with the most powerful leaders in human civilization. Presidents and generals and scientists and diplomats. They had all come to hear what she had to say. Through the tall windows behind her Earth, hung in space like a blue and green jewel. Catherine had seen that view many times, but it had never felt as meaningful as it did now. That small world was home to a species that had just been given the keys to the galaxy. She placed the crystal on the podium before her and began to speak. She told them everything. She told them about the architects and the guardianship. She told them about the test and why humanity had passed it. She told them about the 12 repositories and the technology they contained. She told them about the warnings and the dangers that lay ahead. When she finished speaking, the room was silent. The leaders looked at each other with expressions that ranged from wonder to fear to disbelief. President Marcus Webb was the first to speak. He was an older man with gray hair and a face lined by years of difficult decisions. He leaned forward in his chair and asked if she was telling them that an ancient alien race had decided humanity, passed some kind of test, and was now giving them the keys to the kingdom. Catherine admitted that it was not that simple. The architects were giving humanity an opportunity. What they did with it was their choice. General Patricia Hayes spoke up from her seat at the council table. She was a stern woman who had spent her entire life in the military. She asked what the Valorians thought about all of this. Catherine allowed herself a small smile. She told the general that High Commander Thorne had requested a meeting. He wanted to discuss the possibility of a formal alliance between the Valorian Empire and the Terran Alliance. A murmur of surprise ran through the chamber. The Valorians had never sought an alliance with anyone. They had always been conquerors who took what they wanted by force. For them to ask for partnership was unprecedented. Catherine explained that the Valorians were scared. The encounter with the guardianship had shown them that there were forces in the galaxy far beyond anything they had ever faced. They understood now that standing alone might mean standing against threats they could not survive. For the first time in their history, they were willing to see humans as equals rather than as lesser beings. Dr. Lucy Graham had been examining the crystal with barely contained excitement. She was the chief scientist of the Terran Alliance, and her eyes were shining as she spoke. She said that the technology described in the coordinates was beyond anything they had imagined. If even a fraction of it was real, they were looking at a complete transformation of human civilization. Disease and poverty and the energy crisis that had plagued humanity for centuries. All of it could be solved within a single generation. General Hayes spoke again in a grim tone. She reminded everyone not to forget about the weapons. The same technology that could heal could also destroy. Catherine nodded. She told them that the architects had warned about that too. These technologies could be used for good or for evil. The choice belonged to humanity. But she believed that this was exactly why the architects had chosen them, because humanity had always strived to be better. They fell, and they failed, and they hurt each other. But they also picked themselves up and learned from their mistakes and tried again. That was what made humans different. President Webb was silent for a long moment. His eyes were fixed on the crystal, as if he could see the future contained within it. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of the decision before them. He said that if they accepted this gift, there would be no going back. They would be stepping onto a galactic stage with players they did not know and facing challenges they could not predict. He asked if they were ready for that. Catherine thought about her crew on the Resolute. She thought about Perry and his steady calm. She thought about Marsh and his determination. She thought about Brooks, who had waited for her without question. She thought about all the humans who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. She admitted that they were not ready. They could not be ready for something this vast. But she said that had never stopped humanity before. They had gone to the moon before they were ready. They had cured diseases before they fully understood them. They had reached for things they could not quite grasp, and somehow they had found a way to hold on. That was who humans were. That was what they did. She picked up the crystal and held it to the light. The colors within it shifted and danced like living fire. She said that the architects had waited 3,000 years for a species brave enough or foolish enough to step through the door they had left open. And here humanity was, brave and foolish and imperfect and ready to try. The chamber fell silent again. Catherine watched the faces of the leaders around her. She could see the fear in their eyes, but she could also see something else. She could see hope. President Webb looked at the crystal, and then at Catherine, and then at the image of Earth hanging in space behind her. He said that God helped them all. Then he said that they should see what was out there. 3 months later, the first joint human and Valorian expedition departed for the nearest repository coordinates. Admiral Catherine Cole stood on the bridge of the Resolute and watched as the stars stretched into lines and the ship leaped toward the unknown. Beside her, Commander Perry shook his head in wonder. He said that when he had signed up for this job, he had expected to spend his career patrolling trade routes and chasing smugglers. He had not expected anything like this. Catherine asked if he was disappointed. Perry admitted that he was terrified. But he said he was also excited. For the first time in his life, it felt like they were actually going somewhere. It felt like everything humanity had ever done and all of human history had just been the prologue to something greater. Catherine smiled and said that maybe it was. Maybe this was where the real story began. The Resolute sailed on through the darkness, carrying the hopes and fears of humanity into a universe that had been waiting far too long for someone brave enough to accept its invitation. Behind them, Earth grew smaller until it was just another point of lag among billions. Ahead of them lay wonders and dangers beyond imagination. And across the galaxy, other things began to stir. Ancient powers that had slumbered for eons sensed a change that was coming. Some watched with curiosity. Some watched with hunger. Some watched with fear. The test had been passed and the gift had been accepted. But the trials were only beginning. Humanity had taken its first step into a larger universe. Whatever came next would determine the fate of not just one species, but countless worlds and civilizations across the galaxy. It was a heavy burden to carry. But if any species could bear that weight, it was the one that had learned to fall down and get back up again. It was the one that carried both darkness and light within itself and chose the light. It was humanity. And their story was just beginning.